Guys, welcome back. It is the Built by Vitality podcast. My name is Steve Pinkerton, and I'm sitting, as always, next to
Philip Lewis.
And today, we have an exciting guest, Pete Latz. Before I let Pete dive into his background a little bit, I'll explain to you my most recent memories of Pete Latz. Pete was the first tenant we ever had at Vitality. You probably didn't even know this. He was the vice president of a company called Repucom, and we had built this facility. And Pete is somebody, my dad always said, hey, make sure you get really smart people that you can talk to, that you can steal some stuff from, because they got good ideas. Well, Pete is the 10-pound brain guy. The first interaction of like a true 10-pound giant gorilla brain is Pete Latz. So in the process of building this, he says, hey, we could relocate, Repucom, we're in the market to find new space. I said, wow, that'd be amazing, So this is how naive I was. I'm like, man, I got to go on the internet and find like a lease something, figure out what I'm going to do. So I remember I sent him like a rough draft of the lease, and I don't even know if Pete remembers this, but I didn't realize in Word that you could like redline. When people say, oh, I redlined it, you know what I mean? It means they made a change and they put a red line and it's in red. When he sent me my copy of the lease back, I was like, man, maybe I underestimated Pete. Like, I don't think he understands. He sent it back to me and highlighted everything in red. Like, he changed the font to red instead of black. Like, I don't know if maybe he's colorblind or whatever. And then I realized every red line, which was 98% of the document, was his changes for what needs to happen.
He amended 98% of the lease.
And I remember thinking, oh man, I am in way over my head, because he's asking questions that not only did I not have the answer for, asking questions that I've never even considered, and they were like very logical questions, like, oh, what's our how we're going to handle the cost of the upfit for the HVAC and all this, and I was like, well, I thought you were going to pay for that. I just had no idea. So that's, the business relationship that I've had with Pete was started with that, just because it's been he was such a mentor in that process. And I use Pete's skeleton for the lease that we did, 70 iterations back and forth, because I would just continue to make mistakes. That's every lease. Every tenant that I have, all 11 tenants, all have Pete Latz's lease agreement. So technically, when we get off air today, he's probably going to ask me for some type of...
I'll send you a bill.
Yeah. You should be getting royalties off that.
Some royalty for that. So
I'm going to Google what it costs to be a lawyer.
But Pete's got a ton of experience on the corporate side. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about finding your purpose, both personally and professionally, and how businesses have kind of transformed this post-COVID. And he's got some really interesting views on this, and he's somebody that has experienced this on all ends. So Pete, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I used to always get nervous when Pete was a tenant here, because whenever you did anything with Pete, I knew I was already at like a huge disadvantage. So if he needed anything, I was like, okay, well, whatever it is he's about to ask me, I'm just going to say yes, because I can't articulate it the way he can. So now I'm in a way that I can speak and we can have a conversation and it won't cost me anything.
Okay. Try being married to me.
Oh, man. I can only imagine.
Oh, man.
And Pete and Jody have been members of Vitality for, years and years. And, we can get into the transition out of Repucom and the move north to the Windy City. We can do as much of that as you want, but can you kind of give us a snapshot of your background so people can kind of understand how, if they don't know you like I know you?
Sure. Appreciate it, Steve. Thank you for having me. Look, and just transitioning back to the office conversation, there's two things that you don't remember, right, which I'll remind you of now. First was the measurement of the decibels, right? So we did take decibel measurements at the old building to ensure that we wouldn't hear what's going on downstairs in my office. And we accounted for that in the drywall, buying some soundproofing. The second is I actually do have the original drawing still. Steve's sort of failed attempt at being an architect, and I will put that in a frame and probably
Oh man.
He said,
give it to you
"Do
for
have
Christmas."
do you have an architect for the space?" I said, "No, I got you." So I remember with a ruler and a pencil,
man.
and I drew everything out and measured everything, and I gave it to him, and he looked at me like, "What?"
It's a don't quit your day job moment. So look, 0% of this today is about me personally, right? But just in terms of my background, I've spent most of my, if not all of my career in marketing, branding, sponsorship, advertising, research, et cetera, sort of helping brands and sort of rights holders. Rights holders mean like properties like leagues and teams and sports or entertainment venues, museums, performing arts centers transact together in a smart way, whether it's financially smart or strategically smart in how they go to market to get you to spend your money, right? So it's all about targeting consumers and making sure that you spend your money in a smart way and get a return on that dollar for entertainment, right? And we know as consumers that we consume things differently. We're sitting here doing a podcast, and 10 years ago, the notion of three idiots doing a podcast on their own didn't exist. Like it just didn't happen, right? So anyone who has a phone now is a media entity. They have a platform. They can talk about anything they want to talk about. Sometimes that doesn't serve the greater good, and sometimes it does. Well, there's a lot of lunatics out there that have a platform that probably shouldn't have a platform. Separate podcast, right? So my experience has always been kind of in marketing. Right now, I'm the managing director of a company called IEG, which does exactly that, which is help brands and properties sort of understand and unlock the power of sponsorship. And during COVID, we absolutely got decimated during COVID. Our business got decimated because our business was sort of helping people who were in the live event business do business, right? And when that went away and there was a global stoppage of sports events and entertainment events, there really wasn't much for us to do. So, we spent a lot of time kind of rejiggering what we do out in the marketplace, and we're coming out of this sort of what I'm calling this post-COVID world, right? Sounds a little bit like Mad Max and Beyond Thunderdome, but it's really interesting because there's been a lot of changes. We've talked a lot about this idea of resumption versus recovery, right? There's a lot of people in the industry and in our personal lives is when are things going to go back to the way that they were? And we're saying this shouldn't go back to the way it was. You should find a new way, right? So we're working very, very hard with a lot of our clients on understanding what this new value narrative is in sponsorship, in marketing and advertising. And what we're seeing, which is the genesis of today's podcast, is this idea of purpose, being purpose driven. So in terms of my background, that's where I'm coming at this from. Again, in terms of full disclaimer, I do not profess to be an authority on this topic. I'm merely an observer of this topic. But the thing that's interesting to me that kind of clunked me on the head is I see it everywhere. I see it everywhere in personal life. I see it in my business life. I see it everywhere. And that's when I wrote a note to Steve saying, hey, man, like this is something we should sort of work on together and talk about on your weekly podcast. And so here we sit. So again, thank you both for having me on today, and hoping to have a little bit of fun today on talking about this kind of important topic.
Now, when you say you're not an authority on this, I would argue that, but we'll agree to disagree. How did you see it? I guess if you had to compare to pre-COVID to what you were seeing with this, where we talked a little bit off air about the companies worrying only about, hey, I'm going to use my platform to make money, and then we'll worry about everything else later. How did that change for you on the corporate side at Repucom, and then when you left, and then now you come full circle post-COVID, and you see this change happening, this morph?
Yeah, I think the answer to that, Steve, is this notion of scale, right? Which is it happened to everyone. It was COVID globally. It is and was the great equalizer, right? Nobody was really immune from it unless you were in the plexiglass business, right? I always joke that if I was in the plexiglass business, I'd be driving a Ferrari in Hawaii right now. But look, I think we always talk a little bit about this notion of epiphanies. Someone who has a big car wreck or has a cancer scare or has a sickness that they come back from, and they come back different. Like they come back changed. Like they have a different view on things. They sort of fraction everything down to what's most important. And frankly, I kind of call those lightning strikes, right? Those are lightning strikes. You always see these things like this guy got struck by lightning. He's a completely different dude now. everyone got struck by lightning with COVID. And I think what we saw is that people are now actually questioning, is everything that I'm doing serving some type of purpose, right? We have 24 hours in a day, some of which we spend in bed. So how can I use those hours to make a difference, either for myself, for my family, for friends of mine, for my business colleagues, whatever it is. And I think people got really rattled. I think they got, emotionally and mentally rattled. So you see all these examples of people who have gone full remote. They're sort of rebuking the 9-to-5 office norms. The notion of getting on a train and going into the city and commuting 5 days a week is gone. Wearing suits to your corporate job, gone. People are taking a priority focus on mental health. They're sort of, serving self over a societal norm. Look at Simone Biles. That just doesn't happen. That stuff did not happen before COVID, right? And so there's a lot of these conversations that are now in the frame that didn't used to be in the frame. And I do not want to make this whole conversation today about COVID and all the bad things and good things that it potentially did for us, but it was a big shake, right? It was taking something and literally shaking it to the point of like waking people up. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. There's a lot of stuff on LinkedIn about people who are bailing out of corporate life and starting a candle company, or they are saying, look, there's a really well-known guy in the advertising industry who came out recently and said, as of today, I'm not working on alcohol clients, tobacco clients, or gambling. Those are 3 things I will not work on, right? And before, this would be like, well, you're just throwing money out the window. Mm-hmm. You're literally like throwing money out the window by making a proclamation like that. So that stuff is now okay to do, right? We see a lot of energy around not celebrating what's called the hustle culture, which is like, hey, I'm a really hard worker. I missed my kid's birth. Aren't I cool? Mm-hmm. No, you're an idiot. Like, you shouldn't have done that. Companies now have paternity leave. So like, there are examples that go on and on and on about like just everybody slowing the you-know-what down and taking a view of what are you doing with your life, and is it actually meaning something? Or are you going to wake up one day after a lightning strike and be like, what the hell have I been doing? What's going on? So that's where it comes in really, really strong for me on the personal side, right? And I've got all my examples of, we moved up to Chicago for this job, and then all of a sudden COVID comes. We saw an opportunity to close the office and come back to this community that we love, and we did it. COVID gave me that opportunity, right? So I sat down with my wife and daughter and said, this is an opportunity for us. Is this important to us? And we all resoundingly said, yes. It's going to take some work. It's not easy. It's not easy to have a teenage daughter go away for 2 years and come back. Like, it takes work. So but it's worth it, right? So for us, that's really, really important. And those are the kinds of things that before it's like, why the hell would you move back to Charlotte? You just moved up here. That's stupid. Mm-hmm. Like, it would have just been discounted. And now everyone's just like, oh, that's amazing that you're able to do that. We love that you're back. Mm-hmm. So like, we came back here, was like we never left. It was amazing. And it still is. And we're super happy about it. So I think, look, you could go on, and you guys probably have your own examples about purpose and having meaning and sort of making sure that you're evaluating like what I'm doing right now, what sort of greater good is that serving? And this is different than, as I said to you earlier, this is different than Save the Otters, right? This isn't a Save the Otters thing. Some people take a cause and they're like, I was put on this earth to save the otters. And it's like, okay, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about personal purpose, like being a person that's actually contributing something to your family, your community, your friend group, your society, whatever it is, your church. Those are all super important.
Do you think the consumer, when you talk about this shift that's happening, do you think the consumer can pick up on this pretty easily if they can look at a company that doesn't make this shift and maybe didn't wake up like everybody else did as far as purpose goes and change the way that they do it, so they are setting up in some way to give back or to run their business a little more meaningful? If those companies don't do that, do you think the consumer can easily navigate and see through what the differences are of those companies that are kind of staying back and not adapting?
100%. And that's an important piece, because that's one of the steps, and we're not there yet. And I'll give you an example or a reason why. Because right now it's manifesting itself in, guess what? Cancel culture, right? So what's happening right now is that the cultures of companies and the behaviors of people, because of social media, because of the virality of these platforms, right? We can all see behind a curtain that we didn't used to be able to see behind, right? And I'll give you an example in a minute. And what we're doing is a negative reaction, which is I'm punishing you for doing something or not doing something. And what I want to see the shift towards is rewarding people for doing something right or good. And we'll get there, and we have examples of that right now. But the whole notion of everyone's on edge, we're in a very, very divisive society right now. Civil discourse out the window. It doesn't exist. You're either on one side or the other. And that's pretty sad, right? We just commemorated the 20th anniversary of 9/11, right? A few weeks back. And there was an article in, I think it was a Washington Post, that said, does the America of today deserve the sacrifice that was made 20 years ago? It was a really interesting question, right? And I won't delve into that of what I think about that necessarily, but cancel culture is really challenging, right? And I think that there are so many people that are now taking a view of what's happening at companies. One of the examples is Away Luggage, right? Away Luggage is a company that sort of uses a very serene, sort of hipster travel vibe to sell very clean, modern luggage. And they got called on the carpet for having a very, very toxic culture that was work till midnight or you're fired. Don't worry about your nanny. Your kids aren't important. Your family's not important. Being here like I was here, was the founder actually of the company. And she had to resign. She had to resign from Away, and it really damaged their brand. We see it happening all the time. It's happening at Activision Blizzard, which is a big gaming company. They've got a toxic work culture issue, and people are bailing out of that franchise. Uber's had it. Right? Uber had a massive issue with toxic workplace and sort of the visibility of that. It comes out and people start to sting that company for it or punish. It happens in sports, right? Washington football team, still called that to this day. It happened this week or last week with the Minnesota Timberwolves. The head of the front office had to resign based on some stuff that was going on in the business office at the Timberwolves. It happens everywhere. And you didn't used to know about it, right? You used to get brushed under the rug. And now consumers are saying, you know what? I'm not tolerating that anymore. I'm not supporting it. It gets a little bit crazy. We can talk about statues going into rivers and that kind of thing later. But I think ultimately the cancel culture for me has been challenging to watch, but I'm sort of looking at the bigger picture.
The bigger picture being, as a consumer, we can only direct change based on what we spend our money on. So if we don't think that a company deserves our financial support, then we stop supporting them financially. When you were at Repucom, did you ever, and this was 4 years ago, 4 years ago, did you ever think that it would come? Did you worry about the workplace environment? Was that something that was in top of mind, like it would be today for some of these CEOs that are or these big executives that are running these companies? Do you think that's been a really big shift in what they're keeping their eyes out for versus what they were looking at 4 years ago?
Look, I think that there's some industries, financial services, legal, that probably still have more of a corporate culture, that want people in the office, that want people dressed up, that want people not on a Zoom with their cat running past the camera because it's not professional. Look, I was an office Nazi. You know that about me, about this place. If you weren't in the office, you were immediately like doing something you shouldn't have been doing. Mm-hmm. And so it's been a big mind shift for me to go from where I was on that to where I am now, which is full remote. My whole team is full remote. And we've been working, I would argue, better together because of that. And that's another thing of like, the thing just broke, right? It just broke. And we only looked at it because we had to, not because someone said, hey, what if we just all went home what if we went home to do jigsaw puzzles for a year? And that happened. So I again look at that, like, it's almost like this is day zero for a lot of people. Both personally and professionally. So I think there are certain industries that are trying to wrangle themselves back to the old world, this notion of resumption. We see that in our industry in sports and especially sports marketing, is that the sort of revenue train was a runaway train. Like the sort of commercial inertia that exists in sports is insane. Like $26 billion spent every year on sports rights, and they want everything to go back exactly the way it was, right? And what we're coming out saying as sort of advisors to them is you have to refocus on purpose and on community. And if you do it, consumers will reward you for it. So there's some ridiculous statistics, depending on where you look. Something like 75% of younger consumers, and we're talking about trillions of dollars of spending power here, will reward a company if they come out and say that they stand for something. Okay? That same group of consumers think that less than 30% of the companies that they work with have it figured out. So what that spells out is opportunity. The 30 to the high 75%, like you can get that all the way up and profits will go through the roof. Like we always say that having a purposeful sort of business proposition and making money should not be offsetting principles at all. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. We're counseling a lot of our non-sports clients to focus on community building, focus on specific messaging back to that community about how they're changing their outlook, whether it's social, environmental, DEI initiatives, et cetera. Because these companies used to be this sort of rigid exterior. It's like a big building like Enron. It's made up of humans. You know, those are human souls that work inside of companies. And those human souls, because we can see everything, you better show what you got, right? Mm-hmm. So you better be, you know, supportive of your employees and that kind of thing. And look, there are some old school people out there who think that the whole world's gone soft, right? Mm-hmm. And you may have those sort of fleeting thoughts. I sometimes do too, just like, how big of a break are we going to give everyone? Mm-hmm. Like, we got to get the business going again. So that's the other thing for us is just looking at how companies are sort of responding to this. And some are figuring it out. Some are driving right into it. Some are coming out and saying, I don't care what happens with Delta or Lambda or long haul COVID or any of that stuff. We're full remote. Like, it's a benefit. We've had people leave our organization before we announced full remote. They've left to go to companies that made the predetermined decision to go full remote. And this, again, this isn't a conversation about working from home, but it's more about valuing the sort of intangibles of your life that people are now placing a higher value on.
Well, I think you'd look at that pivot. That pivot for a lot of companies, I'm sure, is challenging. But they, like anything, they either adapt to it or they're going to get left behind. But I also think it's interesting. I think back to our parents' generation, where my dad commuted an hour and 15 minutes one way to work and back, another hour and 15 minutes, and the further we get away from that time, the crazier that seems. But I think 10 years ago, I don't think that commute, people wouldn't place that big of an issue. They'd say, okay, well, it's just the way it is. Now I think you're right, where people are putting a different level priority on family time, on again, I think this personal growth, this meditation, napping, however you want to talk about it, I think that's going to be even bigger as we go forward. And I think it has to start at, well, I think you and I were similar. You talk about being the office Nazi. I would agree that 7 years ago, if Philip said, "Hey, I'm gonna work on some stuff from home this morning," I'm like, "Yeah, he's sleeping in bed, probably
he's hungover."
Yeah, he's
he's just tired,
eating ho-hos in bed.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I've had to shift a little bit, but it's just my mindset's changed to where I really don't care where Philip works. If he's getting his stuff done, what's it matter? If it makes him happier, if people are happier operating a certain way, but I'm still getting the same value out of them in business, then I'm good with that. It's just taken me a little longer because for some reason I've had some different things ingrained in what I believed, whether that was the Marine Corps that did that to me or whatever. I always thought that, hey, we're going to grind in the office, and when we leave the office, it's time to, we're done for the day, and it's just not like that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the hustle culture is getting attacked pretty fervently. There's a business or a leadership adage that's sort of the trust verify matrix, right? Which is that you can either trust first and verify later, or there are a lot of leaders in the old world who are verify trust, which is I want to check you first and then I will trust you. You have to earn that trust. And most business leaders are saying now that you have to trust your people first. And if they betray it or they don't live up or you can't verify, then you take it away. And that's way more meaningful than the other way around, right? I think it's really, really important to understand that. And it's hard. Like, and look, remember in the early days of The Office, Sophie and Reagan used to write tardy passes for the folks that worked over at the office. They'd take little index cards, and if Jessica Forrest wasn't in the office at 9:05, they get a little note from those guys when they had days off and they'd come to the office here. And look, they don't, my daughter at least, and your kids are probably the same. They don't want to hear about how things were when your dad grew up or when you grew up. And your dad might make an argument that he missed your childhood, and that's tough, man. I mean, someone who skips the birth of their kid so they can attend a big court case and get promoted at a law firm, that's not cool anymore.
Yeah.
And look, some people don't have the luxury to be like so purposeful that you can sit around your house all day and just skip stuff. You still have to turn up. But I think that ultimately the society that we lived in back then didn't accept it. It was you were soft, you were a liberal, you were any number of labels that you can put on someone like that. And I just don't think that's the case anymore. And I think that, I think though that we do have a tendency then that the onus is on us to manage our time better and to go back to the personal side, and we'll play a game in a minute, to be more purposeful, to use that time more wisely. I mean, the amount of things that I can get done in a day, both personally and professionally, is astounding versus when I was on a 5-day, 2-day sort of format of weekends and commuting, and I'll go to the eye doctor on a Saturday morning or whatever the hell it was. I went to the eye doctor yesterday and I spent the entire time in the car on calls. Like, it was great and I'm better for it. And that's amazing. So look, let's play a game. Philip, how many apps do you have on your phone?
Oh man, let me see here.
Oh my.
I know how many apps are on a screen. How many screens of apps do you have?
Well, I got them in little folders.
Of course you do.
Let Steve go first.
It's funny because my kid, Reagan, she gets so mad at me when she looks at my phone. She's like, Dad, will you just organize your apps? And I'm like,
there's widgets for that.
Do organize them. So I was afraid you were going to ask me that. And I've got about 82 apps, 82. I'm not proud of that.
I have 120.
Okay. It's over 100. I'm
Okay.
not going to count all those.
So say that average across the three of us is 100 apps, right?
Yeah.
And so I know this not because I'm brilliant, but because I looked it up. So in the Android, I didn't know this. In the Android store, there are 3.4 million apps. Okay, and I didn't know that they had more than Apple. Apple has 2.2 million apps available.
2.2 million.
So think about the sort of expense of time and how you've been given this freedom, right? This corporate freedom. I can work from home and I can sit around and I can take a break after a call. And so there's a few things that I need to know. I need to wake up in the morning, right? I need to not miss a meeting. I need to, as I said before, I need to know that there's not a serial killer running around my neighborhood. So I might want a news app, local. And I need Wi-Fi, so I could count maybe 10 apps that I use, like that are functional apps that literally like drive my purpose of getting through my day. The rest is all just
Fluff.
Playtime, right? So this whole idea of what are those things that you can carve out and where are we spending our time? What's consuming us? What are we consuming? Those are things that I think, again, are happening at scale, literally globally, without sounding sort of dramatic about it. And there's been a lot of change that have been sort of predicated on this massive sort of seismic societal shift that we're seeing again. We see it at home, I see it at work, I see it everywhere. So, the other example to talk about that I sent you the link over, and I'd love for you to buy this, not because I'm a paid endorser, but I saw this in a magazine the other day. It was Outside Magazine, and it's this new phone, Philip. It's called a light phone, and it's basically like a de-engineered phone. So it looks like a smartphone. It's cool. It's designed by some cats in Silicon Valley, but it's de-engineered, meaning You can call people, you can text, you can listen to podcasts, and I think you can get email. Okay.
When you sent me this email, I opened it and I told Jess, I said, "Hey, this is amazing," and I explained it to her, and she said, "Well, why would you want that?" I said, "What do you mean? Why would I want that?" Think about all the decisions that people have to make. By just about 7 months ago, I turned off the notifications on my phone because I got so annoyed with the Pavlov response of something dinging or popping up and then always being like, "Oh, what was that?" And then you're going to open it up and read it or whatever. And I'm still way too connected to my phone, but I'm fully aware of that, whereas a lot of other people, they don't even realize how connected they are and how much time they give up. And again, you talk about those 5 to 10 apps that are taking you to your purpose, but what about the other 90? Like, how much are those pulling you away? And there's got to be this at some point, a business had to pivot and say, okay, well, we're going to make this change or we're going to get left behind. I would argue that in the personal side, I just had this conversation the other day where I don't know how you unwind this. I don't know how you unwind it for a 13, 14, 15-year-old when they have this at their fingertips. What happens when they're, because we've only had this, I don't know, when I was in college, I had a flip phone, so call it 15, 20 years. And that's half my life. But these kids have had it.
High school.
Yeah, these kids have had it their entire life. So how do you get out? How do you get away from it?
Look, the article was interesting because it profiled the typical user. The typical user is guys like us who want to unplug on a weekend. And quite literally, you can take the SIM card from your phone, your connected phone or smartphone, as they call them, and put it into the light phone so you can just have a weekend. Right? You can still email people. You can still listen to a podcast. You can still receive a text. When you receive a photo on this phone, it comes in as a JPEG attachment. So you can't look at it. You can't. So it's interesting. One of the guys said in the article, he said, a friend of mine sent a picture of his new baby, right? And I couldn't look at it. And he didn't know that I couldn't look at it. It was a JPEG. It said baby.jpg. And he wrote back, "She's beautiful." Didn't even look at the picture. Like, why do you need to look at the picture? Like, it's a baby. It's all babies are beautiful. So he wrote back, "She's beautiful," and went about his day. He didn't email himself the picture to look at it and be like, "Oh, look at this picture." So again, I'm not trying to get people to take a vow of no technology and turn everyone into priests here, but I think that there's a finite number of hours in a day. I left social media after watching Social Dilemma last September. And I truly believe my life is better for it.
So no social media.
Zero. LinkedIn and Twitter for work only. And Nextdoor, so I know if there's a serial killer in my neighborhood.
Smart.
So I have zero FOMO in my life. I have no idea what anyone's doing. I know what you guys are doing because I'm here right now. That's different. That's like a super uber personal sort of purpose thing that doesn't really drive directly into today. But I think that all those things add up. Mm-hmm. They all add up. And if you start shifting that mindset at home, you start working differently. You start thinking about the way that you program workouts. Like, what are we accomplishing with this, right? And those kinds of things are really important. We've all heard the sort of cachet around Marie Kondo, right? The art of tidying up. And she phrases it a little differently, which is like, does something give you joy? Like a possession, like, thank you for, serving me well sweater, but you're going to Goodwill. It's a little bit like that, but maybe a notch up in the sort of philosophical of sort of like, what is the purpose of this? I actually have a slide that I use in some of our presentations to clients where we talk about, we call it partnerships with a purpose, which is that if you can find a community angle that you're actually serious about and not being a bullshit artist or superficial about it, consumers will respond. Corporate sponsors will get on board saying, look, I want to sponsor a thematic platform about cleaning up my neighborhood or helping an underrepresented or an underserved community. Whereas before it was, where can I screw my sign into your building, right? And so that value narrative is shifting very, very rapidly. And so what we talk about is partnerships with a purpose. And if you can't find purpose, at least have a point. right? At least have a reason that you can articulate why you did something. Like, why'd you do that? Well, here's why I did it. And people are like, okay, that makes sense. So Stanley Black & Decker, right? DeWalt Tools, brand that we're all familiar with. They're historically very, very traditional in their marketing, right? Hoods of race cars, EPL sponsorship and global football, screen signs into walls, et cetera. They just literally yesterday announced this new program where they've created a sponsorship around a grant program to try to get the trades going again, like carpentry and what they call makers. Makers is the new definition of people who create things, right? And it's meaningful. So it's this maker grant. It's creative. It's kind of like artists, like valuing local businesses and local skills. These folks are extremely talented, as you know. And guess what they buy and guess what they use? They use tools. So they've created this grant program to try to get the vocational arts back up and running again because it's an area that people have completely bailed out of, right? And I mean, how many times does the gray van pull up to your house from Amazon and bring you something from China where you can go to a local business in Concord and probably buy the same thing, right? Yep. And so we did a lot of the local business support stuff during COVID. That was like a bit of a vibe that happened during COVID. But I think companies that can find a relevant way to make that make sense for their business and get the sort of the equity runoff or the blowback, the good blowback from consumers, we're seeing that. Like, I could give you hundreds of examples. Like it's everywhere. And that's again why we're sitting down here today talking about it. But it's really kind of interesting to me to sort of observe it.
You know, I think the hard part, you know, we do some consulting with different gyms, not a ton anymore, but there's a lot of gyms that I think would like to get to that point, but they don't have the success yet to be able to pull back enough or to pivot. Would your advice to these other businesses, whether they're gyms or whatever, that are still kind of in their infant stage, can they take their eye off of their bottom line? Can they take their eye off that capitalistic tendency to focus more on giving back at the same time, or does this have to be kind of, hey, we've got to establish ourselves and then you can pivot into this kind of purpose-driven business? Do you think that they can do that right from the start, these newer businesses that are kind of still startup, if you will?
I think so. And I think the reason I say that is because they've got an angle on why they're in business in the first place. They usually have a really impressive story. They have an interesting story. Entrepreneurs are cut from a completely different cloth than your typical sort of person who's a steward in an office building, who's going to, someone's going to be in his chair after he retires kind of thing. And people don't want to die in a cubicle, right? So usually an entrepreneur will have been driven to that business need for some type of creative reason. And they're usually pretty good about telling that story. I was chatting with someone this morning about this exact topic on the yoga studio, right? On some of this stuff where people sometimes have a business idea and it should probably just stay an idea, right? I wasn't saying that about the yoga studio. I was saying that generally you see sometimes they don't think through it. They don't have a business plan. They don't promote it. They confuse passion with revenue, which I've always argued against. If you really, really love something, you probably shouldn't make it your vocation. But ultimately, there's this. I have a friend of mine who actually just took the job as the CMO of Topgolf. He's a really smart guy. He's worked at Starbucks, Nike, Converse. He ran an ad agency for a bunch of years, and he has advice for brands, specifically advertisers. And he says you have three choices, right? You can help me, you can entertain me, or you can get out of the way. Like, I'm not interested in really anything else. And one of the the things that we joke about at home was, again, COVID reference, was all of this shitty advertising that came out during COVID. They made a sort of a montage video of all the the piano music and the black and white sort of papers floating in an empty New York City street. And then, you got brands coming out like Lexus saying, "We're here for you." And it's like, what the hell are you going to do for me? Like, well, if you buy a car, we'll deliver it to your house, touchless. And it's like, I'm worried about how I'm going to go to the grocery store, and Lexus is here for me. So I think there was a lot of tone deafness during COVID with marketing and certainly with advertising and sponsorship. Unfortunately, a lot of our clients were caught very, very flat-footed during COVID, meaning live events got canceled and their entire plan was predicated on people crowding into a stadium. They didn't have their social media figured out. They didn't have storytelling opportunities figured out. They didn't have content in the can. They didn't have any of this stuff. And these are really smart people, big brands like, what do we do? And it's like, we should make a digital program. And it's like, so we did a lot of work around reconciliations, right? We did a lot of accounting for brands who were left short on what they were owed by sports teams and leagues and everything else. And it was a big number. So we were the arbitrators that came in and said, okay, you stay over here, you stay over here. I'm here to tell you how much money you owe him, right? And the brands wanted cash back, and the teams and leagues that were like, no, we'll just make it good next year, or we'll give you sponsorship of something else, or we'll give you a bank of credit. And they're like, no, we don't want that. I mean, we spent almost an entire year last year doing that. We did it for about 60 different clients. And, it was fascinating to watch the mindsets of these people on how they were thinking about, I'd never in a million years contemplated that this would happen. There were only two instances where people had global pandemic insurance. One was Wimbledon. They were paying a ridiculous amount of money for like 15 years on global pandemic insurance, and they got paid out like $100 million when they cashed it in. So that was one, and I think the Ryder Cup was another one that had global pandemic insurance. But
Vitality didn't get the global pandemic
Talk to
insurance.
Superior Insurance about that.
Yeah, we talked to Superior Insurance is going to. They're our new sponsor.
This is a line. This is a line extension for Derek after he buys you a new camera lens.
That's right.
So yeah, man, it's just like we said, kind of getting ready for today. Like, you could go on and on and on about this, and it's not about what happened. It's about what's happening now, and how people are different and hopefully better for it. I think there's a lot of folks that are still on their knees on some of this stuff, and that's where companies have an opportunity to help. We're starting to see abbreviations in our business that we didn't used to see before. DEI is now the new kind of buzzword, and certainly the social and environmental stuff. SGE, I think it is social governance and environmental. Those things are very corporatized terms, and when brands can figure out a way to make it come to life, that's where the magic starts to happen. And it's not easy to do, because people have just been like, these used to be departments that were in the basements of companies. It was called CSR, Community and Social Relations. And now that CSR group, their budgets, they didn't have any budgets. They would go sponsor a 10K or Habitat for Humanity build in a park somewhere and kind of tick the box on community service. And now it's becoming a marketing platform. And that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing if it's done properly and if it's taken seriously, and these people are serious about it and they actually walk the talk. But there's some brands who haven't figured it out yet either, and there's still some brands who are suffering from boycotts. Every week, Sophie, my daughter, is not eating some brand because the brand did something. And it's all on TikTok. I can't keep track of who did what. Like, there's brands stepping in shit every single day.
It's like, Pete's like, okay, so what can I not buy this week? What do I not get this week? Can you please tell me that my ice cream is still good?
Who's
like,
canceled?
Who's
canceled?
As we close this out, what do you think? What would you tell someone on the personal side when personally, I think a lot of people emotionally just took a beating from the pandemic. As they come out of this and they are trying to kind of reevaluate things, what do you think? Is there any advice or things you would tell them to help them have some clarity in their purpose, or to, I guess, maybe reset the way that they prioritize what's important to them? As they look for, because I think there's a lot of people that are going to be looking for maybe new jobs or, evaluating, is what they're doing now making them happy, or are there opportunities to do something else? I couldn't agree more with, I'd love to see people do what they're passionate about, but as soon as the majority of people find what they're passionate about, they shouldn't try and make money off of that, because then it makes what they're passionate about probably what they're going to end up resenting in the end. But
yeah, look, we go back to high school level or maybe college level psychology, right? The Abraham Maslow, you guys are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? He has a triangle, and it's as basic as it gets. And the bottom of the triangle is shelter, right? Shelter of where you live, and then there's food and water, and then there's, safety and security, and then there's employment and disposable income. And what's the top of the pyramid? The top of the pyramid is this concept of self-actualization, which is I don't think there's a lot of people who are self-actualizing right now. I think people have gone down Maslow's pyramid or hierarchy. I think about Maslow all the time, even pre-COVID, of where are you in that sort of process? So I think we've all been knocked down a few rungs on that sort of hierarchy or tier of needs. And that's what I focus on, which is, do we have a roof over our heads? Are we safe? Are we healthy physically, mentally? Getting those things right is literally the foundation of the visual of a pyramid. And if those things aren't right, you're never going to get to the top of the pyramid. It's as basic as it gets. So I think that's it's unfortunate that our kids are at the time that they are in their life and they had to go through this because it's been very destabilizing. But at the same time, it can be a sort of propeller forward. And that's how I'm looking at it, which is it's on you to make the change. Jody and I had to really work really, really hard, and so did Sophie, to get ourselves back here. But it was important, right? It was absolutely important for us to do it. And so, those are the kinds of things of taking stock, right? Taking stock of the things that are meaningful in your life. And even friendships, sometimes people have friendships that just, aren't meaningful, and, they're called unhealthy or toxic relationships sort of thing. So I think those kinds of things are really, really important. And I think I'm a little bit sort of put off by how divisive the society that we're in is right now. It's really disappointing that people are, like I said earlier, so the polarity of it's one side or the other, and there's no middle ground. I think we need to find a little bit of a middle ground. Again, not wanting to venture into politics or anything like that, but I just think that it can't be these viral videos of people snapping at the grocery store. That can't be our future.
Yeah.
It cannot be our future. I mean, the whole term Karen didn't exist 3-4 years ago, and now you've got an entire TikTok channel of Karen's Gone Wild.
Yeah.
And it's just, look, it's entertaining. It's another app that I deleted. It's entertaining, but what's it really doing?
Yeah.
Do we really need to be giving that the attention that it's getting? And so some of it's just a general sort of personal maturity discussion, business maturity discussion of how mature and sort of good is your business, where you can actually start to go out and serve the community where you live and work. Those things are, and I think that the business returns will happen over time, but I think you've got a society that's as receptive to it as they've ever been. I mean, you've got a ton of spending power with that younger audience that is looking for you to say what you stand for. Almost in a negative way, challenging you.
Yeah.
I want to know how you think so I can cancel you if you don't think the way I think.
Yeah.
That's not good right now, and that's the phase we're in right now. And like I said, that's disappointing to watch. But I'm not watching any of it anymore. I just don't pay attention to it.
Yeah. You see what Pete did there? He actually made me nervous before. He doesn't even know it. I'm a psychology major. And he's like, yeah, high school psychology. And I'm like, oh, dude, where's he going?
no.
And he goes,
Maslow.
And I'm like, God dang it, Pete, don't ask me that. Don't ask me that. Because I can see it in a textbook, but I couldn't recall it like Pete did.
You know Maslow.
Yeah. I mean, I know Maslow. I just couldn't recite it right there.
Well, I don't know the middle tiers either. I just know there's food and shelter, and
I'm over here sweating like I studied this thing.
This is my
I'm
first time
sweating
in
it. This
psychology.
light, you need to get Derek to buy you a cooler light.
Well,
too.
if it wasn't for me, we'd have Spencer in here holding a flashlight on us during the podcast.
Well, before I found my purpose and I, invested
right.
some money into our setup, I just thought, why would we have a big light that costs a bunch of money? I just put Spencer with an iPhone or a flashlight and we'll just shine it on him. But I think it's really interesting. I think that people's mind, the mindset has to shift, and I never looked at it. I never looked at it in the way that you talked about, where COVID was that lightning strike for people. I think it's however you view it. If people view it as only negative, then they're only going to find negative things that are the result of the pandemic. But the flip side is none of this would have ever changed. You look at the structure of corporate offices; those were never going to change to a remote setting without this
way.
lightning strike.
No
Never
way.
going to change. And maybe, just maybe, that will be a turning point in our economy across the board that says, okay, we are going to redo and redefine what the workplace looks like. And now who knows? I mean, the number of lives that are impacted, think about just you personally. You'd still be in Chicago. Granted, it would be in an amazing facility, but you'd be in the office, commuting to work every day. And here you are now, you're able to work remote. You come back to Charlotte, everything, and you're one little story of millions of stories that are like that, that never would have happened without
It's
it.
a great shift. I mean, just the moving side of it. Look at the real estate market. It's gone off the charts, right? And if you live in the city, you move to the suburbs. If you live in the suburbs, you move to the city. Like everyone, it was like the great migration, the great escape. And look, even the most mundane of things. I'll be fine if I never get handed a menu again in a restaurant. I'm totally cool with QR codes. I prefer it, right? Because I can control the thing. I can blow it up. I don't have to sit there and flip through a menu. Like there's just little things that happened out of this last couple of years that just, again, the big shake. Like everything got shaken up and people had to pivot and adapt. Some people did. Some people didn't. Some people got steamrolled by it, and that's really sad. But some people pivoted and adapted and did this notion of reinvention versus resumption. We're crowing on a lot about that at work, which is like, don't sit there crying about when things are going to go back to the way they were. Maybe there's some higher power that says the way things were wasn't working, and so find a new way.
Yeah.
Like be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Discomfort, as you know, at this place is be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so look, you look at it, it's very, very sort of squishy in certain cases. But if you can start to put enough examples of it up on the bulletin board like we've done here today, it's really a pretty cool thing to think about, right? To sort of think about the graduating up Maslow's triangle of like, I want to get back to self-actualized and like feel good about what I'm doing, where I am, who I'm with, all those things. So that's like, again, I can't be more thankful for it than that. Like, I look at the last couple of years and families will say, oh, we reconnected. Dads were around more, like to the chagrin of wives. But I think ultimately, dads were able to experience things that historically they were either on a plane during. My break in business travel was life-changing. It was amazing. I've completely lost my mojo on how to get through an airport, which I love.
I used to get the Pete updates on Facebook of all the things that you should never do when you travel.
I had a travel rant.
amazing.
I had
They
a
were
travel
amazing.
rant on Facebook of like,
It was amazing.
yeah, but that's all gone now, Steve.
Yeah, I know.
The Facebook thing is no longer. So
I know.
I'll just call you when I see something. Yeah.
Well, listen, man, this is really interesting. I appreciate you coming on here. I think this is one of those that you could spin it 10 different ways and spend another couple hours in here. But I think people just need to understand that there's a shift happening, and you're either gonna adapt to this and focus a little more on your purpose, or you're gonna find that you're going to wake up one day and maybe you'll be the old man that says, gosh, I missed all of these things because I was focused on the wrong things.
Yep.
So thank you for
No, guys,
coming on.
thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, this was great.
Guys, thanks for tuning in. This is the Built by Vitality podcast. Until next time, we'll catch you later.